If you want to support independent content like this show, the PlayStation Podcast Sacred Symbols, the Retro Podcast Knockback, and more, and get perks for doing so, please consider subscribing to Colin's Last Stand on Patreon at patreon.com/Colin's Last Stand. Your support is essential. Thank you. This review of Days Gone is based upon a copy of the game provided by Sony ahead of release and free of charge. I've always loved the idea that, for as long as we're living, we're learning. Better yet, no one's immune, no matter how much experience, wisdom, or knowledge we think we have. There's always something new to know, always a fresh perspective from which to look at something. I don't want to get too philosophical with you in a review for a zombie video game, but playing Days Gone provided me with an interesting sort of education. Not in what it is per se, but in how I approach reviewing games, and how the industry foments its own sort of narratives, and how publishing realities can injure a game in really unusual ways, and ultimately in how a person's experience with a product can markedly change over time. Because the thing is, after what feels like 40 or 50 hours with Days Gone, I can't be sure as there's no in-game clock, I really like it. I like it a lot, actually. I like it a lot more than I did 10 or 20 hours in, and I most certainly like it a lot more than I did 5 hours in. The thing is, it's hard to tell if my evolution spawned from me changing or the game itself changing. It's a key point, and something we'll spend a little time on later in the review. For now, though, let's set the stage. Days Gone is an open-world, third-person PS4 exclusive from Sony-owned Bend Studio, commonly known as Sony Bend. Bend is an interesting team, a smaller squad by AAA standards, quietly tucked away in the woods of Central Oregon. Days Gone isn't only Bend Studios' first PlayStation 4 game, it's the first native console game they've done since 2004. Once upon a time, Bend was known as the squad behind Siphon Filter, but it quickly got caught up in the support structure of Sony's handheld initiatives, where it put out high-quality portable versions of Resistance on PSP and Uncharted on Vita. As a result, intrigue surrounding Days Gone has been substantial. How would Bend's jump back to console look after such a long time away, and moreover, how would they handle creating something open world and non-linear after a long list of linear titles? But perhaps the biggest question of all would be if Days Gone could possibly justify its lengthy dev cycle. It's been more than 7 years since Bend put out a game, which is an extraordinary amount of time. Too long, frankly. Days Gone takes place in contemporary times, when some sort of virus plagues much of humanity, bringing billions to their knees. The results are predictably catastrophic. Almost everyone's dead, a few stragglers do what they can to get by, and the rest of the living are, well, not really living at all. The zombified creatures in this world are called freakers, but really, they're just your run-of-the-mill zombies. You've got slow zombies and fast zombies, children zombies and older zombies, weak zombies and strong zombies, big zombies and small zombies. If I'm hitting the zombie note a little too much here, just know that I'm doing so for a reason. Bend and their publishers at Sony made a big deal in the years leading up to release that these enemies aren't zombies, they're freakers, and that's different. Well, it's really not different if we're leveling with one another. It is, however, a nice example of marketing speak, and either way, in this world where governments have failed and danger lurks around every corner, those left intact throw around the words freaks and freakers like you'd expect you'd throw around if you were almost killed by one every day of your life. From the point of view of the player, though, well, this is just another world full of undead creatures. Our protagonist is named Deacon St. John, a grizzled, middle-aged man with a motorcycle and a grudge. But you'd probably have a grudge too if the world fell apart around you, leaving you without your beloved wife and virtually all of your friends. We first meet Deacon about 2 years after society falls, and he's managed to carve out a little niche for himself, hunting freaks for meager rewards alongside his only tether to the old world, his best friend Boozer. Making money in this world is a nasty business, requiring most to bring small pieces of freakers back with them as evidence of conquest, and so Deacon and Boozer have seen their fair share of horrors and close calls. Their brotherhood is one of the strengths of Days Gone, a brotherhood forged in a so-called motorcycle club called the Mongrels. The two men even still wear their vests and other branding, proudly flashing their colors in a world that doesn't much care anymore. As the two men get drawn more and more into the multi-pronged plot at the center of the experience, which I won't get too deep into here so as to not spoil anything, you'll meet some other great characters too, including the formidable Iron Mike, the daring Ricky, and many others, all capably written and voice acted. Sam Witwer's performance as Deacon is especially strong. Another major strength of Days Gone is its setting, Oregon. Bend basically made its own backyard, and this naturally brings with it a level of authenticity and feel that you simply cannot replicate when you're making foreign or fictional lands. Guerrilla's Horizon Zero Dawn is a work of art, but it's also the product of a team in the Netherlands making a version of Colorado reclaimed by nature, which is thousands of miles from them. Insomniac was a little closer to its open-world muse, New York City, when it developed Spider-Man from Southern California. But really, this reminds me most of Sucker Punch's infamous Second Son, which took place in Seattle, a stone's throw from their Bellevue, Washington offices. The point is, it's no surprise that Days Gone looks the part because the team that created the world lives in that world, sees that world every day, exists in those communities, and merely needs to look out the window to draw inspiration. That's a substantial advantage that few studios get. Getting around the world that Ben created can be done on foot, but you'll be seeing most of it on the back of your motorcycle. Driving your bike feels really good, and I actually drew a mental comparison almost immediately between my bike in Days Gone and my horses in Red Dead Redemption 2, and how much more I like the bike here than the horses there. That's because I can never really get attached to a horse because, well, it might die. I might say try to jump it over a moving train and fail, and so my steed is no more. But no matter how hard I run my bike into a boulder or how high off a cliff it falls, I can just repair it and move on so long as I have the scrap or cash to do so. I might die and respawn, but so will my bike. I dug this because it allowed me to get attached to my mount, and as I worked to customize it and soup it up, I felt like I was making progress. Your bike's kind of like another character. Now, while it certainly makes sense that Deacon's and Boozer's world would center around their motorcycles, what's a little stranger is that the entire surviving world revolves around their bikes as well. And this is where both the story and the immersion take a bit of a hit. No one drives cars in this world, and there's very little explanation as to why. It can't possibly be fuel shortages since you can fill your bike up with endless amounts of free and purchased gas, which also doesn't really make any sense. It could be mechanical know-how, but there are mechanics that fix the bikes. One character brings up how clogged the roads are with abandoned vehicles, so bikes are key in that reality, but explore the world enough and you'll see that that's not true either. This was a big hang-up for me, not that I couldn't drive a car or truck myself, which is fine, but that literally no one else does. Everyone just rides around on motorcycles, and what's even weirder is that they're all choppers and Harleys with not a Japanese style or sport bike anywhere in sight. Ben certainly populated his world with tons of abandoned cars, but none of the functioning variety. I still have no idea why. And no one ever fully explains why everyone chooses to ride around Oregon's beautiful woods on very loud motorcycles either. I had assumed the freakers were deaf, but they most certainly aren't. When you're not on your bike, chances are you're in combat or about to be. Days Gone handles combat a bit sloppily, though I adjusted to the game's systems over time in such a way that everything made sense and felt good enough. I was a bit disappointed that the game didn't employ any sort of literal cover system, but rather just gives you the ability to crouch behind cover, which I'm not crazy about when so many games do this so much better. I also found that the guns that require a fair bit of aim and control cumbersome to use, and typically deferred to a shotgun or spread machine gun when fighting both human enemies or the freaks. But what I really tried to do most often was employ Days Gone's rudimentary, though perfectly functional stealth system that allowed me to get quiet kills galore, and I was also really fond of using melee weapons, particularly blades, sledgehammers, and axes. Unfortunately, those weapons don't last very long before breaking or needing repairs, so you'll be going through plenty of handheld implements on your journey. But their breaking keeps the combat system nice and balanced, and though it's an example of a flaw making another flaw better, enemy AI isn't exactly the most intelligent here, making sometimes wild gunplay a bit easier to work around. It is worth noting that there is one class or type of enemy you encounter in the game that, because of the story, you can neither kill nor even attack, which I found particularly frustrating. If you even try to attack them, you just fail and go back to the last checkpoint. I never really understood how or why that was supposed to be fun. Then again, battling zombie hordes, which I won't even show you here so as to not spoil anything, is probably some of the most thrilling and kinetic gameplay I've experienced in a very long time. Like so much of Days Gone, it's taking the good with the eh. You'll be in the game's radial a lot, the design of which I wasn't crazy about. It's brought up and navigated with combinations of the triggers and sticks, and combat can be really fast, especially when you're fighting freakers. So mercifully, Days Gone slows down time to a near halt when you're choosing your weapon or crafting items, since it requires a bit of dexterity to do so. But even then, I too often selected the wrong weapon and even died a few times because the controls were too sloppy in this regard. There's way too much packed into this one radial, and it's ultimately inelegant. There would be no need to slow down time if the radial simply worked or was more coherent, but this is one piece of design that's way off base, which is a shame since other choices made in regard to the UI, HUD, maps, and more all make a lot of sense. I was especially relieved to see a coherent quick travel system, though it's a little annoying that you need to have both the fuel and a repaired bike to utilize it. Fueling and repairing your bike is typically easy enough, however, so it's just an extra step in the process. Less fun is the crafting system, which opens up more and more the further you get into the game. I don't mind having to create my own bombs and the like, but I did find the adventure to be really stingy with some components, and thought it was strange that you couldn't buy what you needed, apart from some finished items. I also found it strange that different encampments required different currency, which is just outright annoying, though I did really like the so-called trust system, where you build your reputation with various outposts by doing tasks for them, selling them freaker parts and more, thus unlocking newer quests, better upgrades, and the like. When examining Days Gone from a bird's eye view, you'll notice that it does very little that you wouldn't see in other open worlds. Its non-linear slant means you can undertake any number of missions or side quests in multiple orders, and there are plenty of random events and occurrences to keep you busy too. You'll kill dangerous criminals, find missing persons, gather necessities, and more. Multiple through lines intersect and weave in and out of each other, and there are plenty of boxes to check too, like destroying enemy camps, taking over government installations, finding permanent upgrades for Deacon, and gathering collectibles, of which there are many. Ben certainly didn't reinvent the open world game with Days Gone, they merely made their own version of an increasingly well-worn genre, and so from this angle, it does very little to stand out. If anything, I think it gets a little too complicated with its percentage-based completion metrics across all of these different missions and side quests and the like. It's a confusing hodgepodge of what I would call video game stuff, and if anything, Ben should have been encouraged to throttle this stuff back, as opposed to push it forward. Because when I complete a mission, I just need to know that I completed that mission. Not that I did 10% of this and 15% of this and 8% of this. I didn't even know exactly what I was reading after a while. Thankfully, the experience, leveling, and skill tree systems all fit perfectly into the game. I'm writing and releasing this review in the post-release environment, which is relevant because I actually had the game for a few weeks before it came out, and so experienced it in its pre-release state. The reality is, Days Gone was noticeably broken in some ways when I played it up to and through the 1.02 patch. I'd lose sound randomly, my motorcycle and the environment would stop making noise, the game would crash, the AI was wonky, strange stuff would happen in cutscenes, and more. In fact, the problems were so severe that I told Sony I was experiencing them, which is something I'd rarely do because I couldn't believe they put this game into people's hands in the condition it was in, and I wanted to inquire if fixes were incoming. And in speaking to other reviewers before embargo, I know I wasn't the only one experiencing problems, and people were reporting a whole slew of problems that I wasn't. In other words, it was a bit of a mess, and I really think that Sony's publishing arm and whatever PR and marketing was working with Ben have to take some responsibility for essentially letting us play two different games. Days Gone starts slow, and I wasn't crazy about it at first, with or without the technical problems. But the persistent issues made me not want to play the game at all, and it wasn't until patches 1.03 and 1.04 that the game became exponentially better from a technical standpoint. This is a teaching moment for Sony, frankly, and either way, patching a game 4 times before it even comes out is a bad sign for the already lengthy development cycle of a game that, mind you, was already delayed. But I digress. But with so many of my early complaints solved by patches, all that's left is a massive piece of substantive feedback that I hope Ben can take on board as they ideally work towards a sequel. Days Gone gets in the player's way far too often, and that's a shame because it's fun when you can just play. The adventure constantly pops up load screens, can ruin gameplay moments with scripted events, constantly and sloppily uses Deacon's radio as a way to unleash tons of exposition on the player, and really tries to wedge its story into the experience in disruptive ways. With a game like this, I want to play first and foremost, that's why I'm here. So why am I riding from point A to point B after a cutscene, and then 10 seconds later, there's another cutscene? Why am I riding somewhere to meet someone and then have the game elapse to a different time of day to make the meeting make sense? Why doesn't the game segue better between cutscenes and play? These are major problems with Days Gone. Sony exclusives are becoming increasingly well known not only for their critical acclaim, but their technical fidelity. I don't know if it's because a Sony studio is using an outside engine, which Ben did on Days Gone, and they don't have the expertise to streamline or optimize the product or what, but Sony's own exclusive family shows how this is done so expertly, and here Ben failed. I was literally having this awesome fight with a horde, running away from them, barely surviving, having myself a moment. Then, unbeknownst to me, I got too close to a quest marker, the game loaded for 20 seconds, I went into a cutscene, and that amazing moment was brought to a sudden end. It was over. Inelegant stuff like that happens way too often in Days Gone. At the end of the day, Days Gone is the first foray for a studio that never made something like this, and from that perspective, I'd call it a success. While deeply flawed in some fundamental ways, particularly when reasonably compared to some of Sony's wildly successful open world and other first-party offerings, Days Gone is an experience that requires time to get into, and perhaps the ability to see through some rough edges to get to its beating heart. But I'm really glad I did. I'm glad I saw it all the way through and played it how it's meant to be played, methodically, slowly, and with intent. Here's hoping Sony Ben gets another crack with a sequel and can really refine what makes Days Gone so promising, while shedding all of the unnecessary weight and other hindrances that only work to hold it back. Because while Days Gone is good, its potential is far more than that.